Boa tarde a todas e a todos. Obrigado por estarem conosco nessa tarde, acompanhando mais uma live do Centro de Desenvolvimento Docente para o Ensino, da Faculdade de Medicina de Ribeirão Preto. Hoje nós temos um convidado muito especial, um grande amigo, o professor Melchor Sánchez, da Universidade Autônoma do México. Ele gentilmente atendeu o nosso convite para poder estar falando hoje aqui para a gente, nas nossas lives desse ano, sobre pesquisa na área de educação das profissões da saúde. O professor Melchor é pediatra pela Universidade do Exército, da Força Aérea. Ele é fellow em pesquisa clínica pelo MIT, Massachusetts. É mestre em educação nas profissões da saúde pela Universidade de Illinois, em Chicago. Doutor em Ciências da Educação na Saúde, da UNAM. Professor permanente em tempo integral da Divisão de Pós-Graduação da UNAM também, Universidade Autônoma do México, pesquisador nacional. Professor e tutor do mestrado em Educação em Ciências da Saúde, pós-graduação da mesma universidade, e coordena, né, dirige a coordenação da Unidade Aberta, Inovação Educacional e Educação à Distância da Universidade Autônoma do México. Tem inúmeras publicações, faz cursos, oferece cursos, treinamentos no México e em todo o mundo, é editor de algumas importantes revistas de educação médica, investigação em educação médica da UNAM, revista universitária digital também da UNAM e editor associado do Advances in Health Science Education. Os interesses em pesquisa do professor Melchor é avaliação educacional no ensino superior, metodologia de investigação em educação, exatamente o tema da nossa live, e educação em ciências da saúde e inovação educacional. Thank you very much, my friend Melchor. Good to have you here. Nós vamos falar em inglês, devagar, slowly, porque fica mais fácil para a gente poder fazer essa interação. Let's go. Thank you again. We also have here Ana Maria Siriani, professor of School of Medicine at Ribeirão Preto, Professor Marcos Borges. Melchor?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ana Maria, Marcos, and Valdez, Lucia. I appreciate a lot that the University of Sao Paulo and your area of medical education invited me to to say something about myself, which is always a little bit uncomfortable because, I mean, everybody has its own pride, but you do not want to be perceived as too full of yourself, arrogant or something like that. But I mean, it's not frequently that you have a chance to say good things about you, and also the lessons learned during my educational life. So I appreciate the invitation, and I hope this is useful, as it has been useful for me to reflect on my life trajectory in medical education. So even though Portuguese and Spanish sound similar, they are very different. So forgive me for not speaking Portuguese. So I will use English. My English is not perfect, but it is better than my Portuguese. So I will use some slides, as every physician knows you cannot live without slides. So this is my email and my data. I am at your service in Mexico City, in the National Autonomous University of Mexico. So next, please, Valdez. So click. So actually, to do things, you have to be born, to arrive into this world. Wait a second, not yet. So as every perinatologist and neonatologist says, can we, very important things happen to us before being born. We are programmed for many things, diseases, a lot of things. So I will not go throughout my whole infancy and adolescence, but I just want to point out that everything that happens to you before birth, when you are a baby, when you are a child, when you are an adolescent, impacts what you do the rest of your life. So the next, please. I will just say next. So at 17 years of age, I entered the Mexican Army Medical School. My father was a neurologic surgeon, and he convinced me to study medicine. And I want to point out here one of the important things about the lives of a physician. Surely you have heard about the concept of meritocracy. We have privileges that are secondary to where we are born, our socioeconomic level, who are our parents, etc., etc. So I think it was a very important step in my life. So I studied medicine in the Army Medical School next. And then when I was a medical student, my father bought me a subscription to the New England Journal of Medicine. And I remember in 1982, when I read the David Eddy's paper in the New England about the art of diagnosis, how to solve the clinical pathological exercise, one of my life passions was born, the clinical reasoning part of it. So I think that was, I have that imprinted in my memory, having this journal in paper at that time. It was 82. And it motivated me to go through with a scholarly trajectory next. And then after I finished medical school, I worked in the Mexican province in a small town. And then I entered the residency in pediatrics, and I had training in pediatric critical care next. And then we, another click, please. And then during that time, I had this passion about decision making, decision analysis, diagnosis, the use of evidence. And you know, when you are a resident in any specialty, you are in love with scientific evidence, and you think that the world really trusts science and everybody's evidence-based, which is, of course, not true. Next. And then the Mexican Army sent me to Boston. I work at the Mass General Hospital in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit as a clinical research fellow in the Laboratory of Metabolism and Human Nutrition at MIT in Cambridge. And I worked in basic science studies and clinical studies of amino acid metabolism and the arginine nitric oxide pathway. And in that period of time, as you can see, context matters a lot. So over there, I had available all the United States libraries, the Harvard Library, the MIT Library, and it began my love affair with informatics. This was in 1992, so internet was just, almost nobody used internet at that time except the Army and some scientists. And I started using Medline, but the very basic first versions of Medline, and I became a member of the Boston Computer Society. I got my first Macintosh computer, which, as you know, has become more of a symbol of using the X type of computers. And I again fell in love with clinical decision making with the JAMA series about the process of diagnosis. Next. And then I returned to Mexico. I worked as the director of the pediatric ICU in the Army Hospital. I taught pediatrics and evidence-based medicine in our medical school. Next. And then during this period of time, I was monothematic about evidence-based medicine. We had academic sessions, weekly sessions. We created a Mexican Association of Evidence-Based Medicine. We wrote a couple of books about evidence-based medicine, several papers, theses, etc., etc. And then the director of the hospital designated me as director of education and research for the whole hospital. And then next, I became very frustrated with the educational process. I mean, I knew a lot about science, about basic science, clinical research. I could explain likelihood ratios, sensitivity, specificity, power, type 1 error, type 2 error, all these sophisticated things that that fill our brains with knowledge. But I was very frustrated with actually having people learn the things that I try to teach. So they told me, you are too complex. We do not understand you. You have to get down to earth. So I took these workshops, the ones that are shown on the slide, the McMaster Evidence-Based How to Teach Evidence-Based Medicine workshop. And it was the first time that I dealt with qualitative research. I mean, it was fascinating. And then I fell in love with medical education in the Harvard Macy Program for Physician Educators. This was in the year 2000. And I decided to change my life and dedicate myself to education because, I mean, in medicine, you take care of a patient one by one, but in education, you help or do not help a lot of people with the educational interventions. So next, and then I looked for options, and I found the University of Illinois at Chicago Masters in Health Professionals Education program, which was online. At that time, I was the director of the pediatric intensive care unit in my hospital, so I had very busy clinical life. So the only option for me was an online asynchronous version, which was perfect because I had a lot of classmates from all over the world, including, for example, David Cook, one of the most famous medical educators of the Mayo Clinic, and several colleagues from all over. Next. And then I decided to retire from the Army. And then next, I was hired by the Faculty of Medicine of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Luckily, they had available a full professor position in medical education with a tenure track option. So I actually was lucky to have this possibility. So I became a full-time professor of medical education. Our university is huge. We have more than 370,000 students, more than 42,000 faculty in the whole university. And the Faculty of Medicine, we have about 8,000 students and 13,000 residents and more than 3,000 professors. Next. And then in the last, in academia and the universities, you need the degree. So I decided to do the doctorate in educational science in my university. I finished that a few years later, and then and then I was designated responsible for the Masters in Health Professionals Education program at my university. And next, the last 8 years, the president of the university was a physician, and he designated me for a central position for the whole university. So I am in charge of educational assessment, educational innovation, faculty development, and educational knowledge translation, but for the whole university. So this has been a fantastic experience. And the next slide, please. And then I just want to outline some of these achievements and One of these is I was privileged to have the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada International Medical Educator of the Year Award. I am a council member, and I have participated in multiple committees in the National Board of Medical Examiners in the United States. I am the editor-in-chief of the Mexican Journal of Medical Education Research, and well, luckily I've had more than 200 papers published in peer-reviewed journals, more than 20 books, more than 50 book chapters, and I belong to the Mexican National System of Researchers, Level 2, and these numbers that for you it may mean nothing, but in universities and academia, these are like gold. I have more than 1,000 citations in the Web of Science and more than 3,000 Google Scholar. And I'm also associate editor of Advances in Health Science Education Springer. And next, and I'm a professor of several massive open online courses in the Coursera platform with about more than 36,000 students. So maybe we can stop sharing the slides and come back to you, Valdez or Lucia, and then we can continue the conversation.
So it's very interesting, like your production. Let me ask, like you published a lot, like all the production was in medical education, or have like part of the production or pediatrician? Like my question is, like, it's very hard to publish in medical education, especially like in the countries from the global south. Like,
yes, I know.
Do you have any comment and suggestion for us, like, to improve this publication?
Well, I have some suggestions about that in the last slides, but for now, I'll just say that probably a little more than half of the publications are related to medical education, many of them in our Global South journals. And but almost half were in pediatrics and the protein and amino acid metabolism. And most of the citations, more than 2/3 of the citations, are of these, my previous pediatric clinical life citations. The citations on the medical education have been much lower because, as you know, it's not so easy for Global South medical educators to publish in the Web of Science indexed medical education journals. So, I mean, it hasn't been easy, but I have had a fantastic team, multidisciplinary team that have helped me with the qualitative research, which I still struggle despite all these years of being involved in medical education.
Because I think this is a challenge, especially in medical education. The context is very important. But if you don't publish like our context, like I think the big problems will not be solved. So I think it's a very complex situation. Like, do you have any comment on that?
Yes, it's context is everything in educational social sciences. Whenever, as I said, I am a very evidence-based guy, but when you show the teachers over here in Mexico a paper published in Harvard or Finland or Japan or England, they always say, but well, that's over there, but we are not in Boston, Melchor. We are here in Mexico. We have to do what we can with what we have. So this part of actually using the medical literature is very difficult because most of the literature is published from other contexts that are very different from ours. So that conceptual leap from externally published evidence with internal validity, the external validity of using it in our context is quite a challenge. And I don't know, Marcos, in the next, I have a few slides about the research. Maybe we can do that now, and then we come back to these issues because this is very important. I will mention briefly about the lines of scholarship, because one of the challenges that we have is that education in many of our countries is actually not considered true scholarship. Because as you know, the scholarship of discovery, which is basic or clinical research, medical research, is the champion. It gets most of the funding and the resources, etc. And education by itself is usually not, in order to be considered scholarship, you have to publish in index journals. So I will mention that a little bit in the next slides. Maybe we can share the screen again, Valdez. Sorry for...
Yeah, okay. Lucia, can you share the screen first, please? Let's see here. Oops. Excuse me.
Presentation, the lines, that one, yes. So as you can see here, I have been multitasking in a lot of areas of medicine and medical education. I love evidence-based medicine. I love the combination of things that require understanding science, understanding research, but also understanding medicine, understand how these impact patients and how these can help society. And the clinical reasoning and all the cognitive and emotional biases that we have as human beings is also one of my favorite themes. And the last few years, I have been very dedicated to evidence-based education, how to translate the educational research literature, not just medical education literature, but also higher education literature, because there is a lot of evidence out there about the education that can be useful for us as medical educators. So this knowledge translation education is one of my main fields of endeavor in the last few years. And also, as I mentioned, I love biomedical informatics. And in the last couple of years, the use of generative artificial intelligence in education. And my focus on educational assessment, my position in the universities in educational assessment, I am in charge of the high-stakes admission exam to the university, which requires to be involved in the science of assessment, and also the science of faculty development. I love the resident as teacher. My contract in the university requires me to teach residents to teach. So that's one of my areas too. Also education innovation, curriculum development, and leadership and organizational change. Next. And just a few samples of these things. This was my thesis in the master's program in Chicago. As you can see, the co-authors are Stephen Downing, one of the fathers of validity in medical education and educational assessment. He was my teacher, and Alan Schwartz, also from Chicago. And I did a randomized controlled trial in the Mexican Army Medical School with a one-semester course of evidence-based medicine in medical students. This was fascinating. Looking back on it, I didn't explicitly write a conceptual framework in the paper. Looking back on it, I see that it was very cognitivist in the sense of frameworks. And well, I mean, we will talk about a little bit more about conceptual framework later. But this was an interesting study. Next. And then when I started working in the university, my position is in resident education. So we did this survey with more than 7,000 residents in the National University of Mexico. We had a more than 60% response rate. It was fascinating to obtain this information because, as you mentioned, if we do not have local information, it's very difficult to have the diagnosis of the context and how to do things. And these are published in Biomed Central Medical Education. Next. And then we did websites about resident as teacher. We published a book about education in medical residencies. And this book was not very profound or very scientific, but very practical and down to earth to teachers of medical residencies. Next. And then, as I said, we did several MOOCs. This is one of them in Coursera with the resident as teacher concept. It's fascinating because in the MOOCs, we have a huge population of registered students from all over the world. Next. And I have been doing a medical education journal club in the medical residencies we started in 2007. So it's more than 15 years now with the journal club. It's a monthly journal club. We discuss medical education, and we published our experience a few years ago in Biomed Central Medical Education. It's very interesting because you actually need to convince the medical teachers, the residency teachers, and the professors in the medical school that we have to use educational evidence to improve our educational skills. Next. And this is a book in Spanish about the whole spectrum of medical education, theory and practice. It covers undergraduate medical education, residency education, and continuing professional development. And it's very interesting because it's the only book in Spanish, at least in Mexico, that covers all these areas. And it helps. We did publish that with Elsevier, and it's been 10 years now. We're working on the second edition now. Next. And another area of very, very intense interest for me was biomedical informatics. And we had a major curricular change in our medical school in 2010. And we developed a mandatory course, a one-year course of biomedical informatics for medical students. So in our medical school, all the students have to learn these concepts, and it involves online learning, use of internet, electronic health record, of course, artificial intelligence, and several things. And we published that using the conceptual framework of David Kern from Johns Hopkins to develop the curriculum. And it's interesting because at that time, we designed it as a blended learning program. It was the first blended learning program in our medical school at that time. And also, of course, the subject of telemedicine, which was critically important during the pandemic. Next. And we published this book about biomedical informatics with colleagues from several colleagues from Latin America, some from Argentina, and Mexico, Colombia, etc. And we have already 3 editions of this book. Next. And as I mentioned, I have been the editor of the Mexican Medical Education Research Journal, which is an open access journal. And we have now been publishing it. It's a quarterly journal for 12 years now. Click. And well, this was the message of the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine in the 10th anniversary of the journal a couple of years ago. Next. And recently, of course, we have been interested in artificial intelligence. This is one of the higher education journal of our university. And my co-author here is an engineer, a computer scientist with a PhD in artificial intelligence. So that underscores the fact that we need to work with other disciplines. Next. And we created this working group of the use of artificial intelligence in education in our university. Next. And we developed a MOOC also in Coursera with the use of artificial intelligence in the classroom. Next. And we had this event with more than 1,000 students and teachers of our university about artificial intelligence in education a few months ago. Next. And we wrote a few recommendations for this use in our university, which are open access. They are in Spanish. Next. And we developed this handbook of the use of artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence in education, in higher education. It's also open access in Spanish. And next. And I mean, we are very concerned about the potential effects of artificial intelligence in education, as I am sure all of you are. Next. And I would like to point out that one of the things that we forget is that we have to tell and explain all these things to society at large. So I developed this TV program. It's like a tertulia, we call it. It's like an informal chat with experts of education. And we recorded more than 150 TV shows that are available in YouTube about everything about higher education, how to learn psychomotor skills, online learning, summative exams, etc., because we have to convince society that education is important. And it's sad that many times what comes in the news about education is only about ugly things. So we have to convince society that educational research needs to be applied in the classroom. Next. And I think I will stop here because this is for the last part of it. Maybe we can come back to that later.
Okay.
So Valdez, I am back.
Great. So we are. Wonderful. Ana Maria?
Yes, I'm impressed, Professor, with how much work you have already done in education. And I see in every time tons of papers as case controls, papers that don't have too much to add about the interventions in education. And I see you conduct RCT, and I would like to know more about how is conducting a RCT in education. How did you randomize studies? How do you put these people on a room with? I don't know how to do it. So if you could share with us.
Well, as you know, it's not easy because in social sciences, I'm sure you're familiar with Campbell's and the social sciences research designs. And in medicine, we are very focused on experiments, on controlled trials, because we develop medicine, we develop therapeutic interventions. So at that time, when I did the master's program, I was very much into evidence-based medicine. So I decided to attempt a randomized controlled trial in order to try to avoid all the confounding factors and biases, selection biases. So I am very aware of the disadvantages of randomized controlled trials in education. I don't know, you have seen the editorial by Jeff Norman in Medical Education, where he says jokingly that RCT means results confounded and trivial, because it's very difficult to do randomized trials in education and control for all the factors. There's no way to do blinding. You cannot blind the teacher and the students to the intervention.
It's the same for exercise.
Yeah.
You don't have how to blind people.
So
you are not doing exercise, so there is no way also.
So I remember one of the things that at that time I was in the Mexican Army Medical School, what we did was to randomize the groups. So we had control over that. So we did the evidence-based medicine course one semester. So we randomized the groups of the students to take the course or to take an aviation medicine course. And the next semester we switched, and then the others. So I mean, the ethical aspects of randomized trials in education are very complex, because if you randomize students to an inferior intervention, you are depriving them of a good thing, supposedly. So that's why we randomized, but we didn't blind. And if you get a look at the paper, it was a very positivist paper, very cognitively oriented. We measured with a multiple choice question exam, and we showed a huge increase in knowledge and attitudes about all the subjects of evidence-based medicine. And the other issue that I am sure you have that issue too is the ethical approval, because this was my thesis in Chicago. And I remember when they told me, you require the approval by an institutional review board. You can do that in your country or in Chicago. So we did that in my medical school. It was not easy because most institutional or ethical scientific review boards in Mexico are used to traditional science, traditional research. So most of the people in those committees are not familiar with social sciences research. For example, I requested a waiver for written informed consent, which was very difficult to convince the committee that it was something that can be done, that is done in education and the social sciences. And at the end of the day, they approved the protocol and I could do it. But the ethical approval of these kind of things is crazy in our countries. It's not easy. I haven't done a randomized control trial.
I guess. Thank you very much.
What caught my attention, and we have been doing these lives with different people, is for the physicians, we start doing research in the educational field using what we know, our references, our beliefs, the hypothesis, try to follow the way of thinking in the medical field. As we go into the medical education, health professionals education field, something changed. And you already mentioned the importance of open your eyes to the qualitative research, the social science giving support to what we are trying to investigate. And this is what I want you to talk about, the frameworks and the shift that usually happens when we try to go and dive in this medical education field. The importance of the framework, the theoretical frameworks, the linking it with context to create and to do hypotheses or questions, try to identify problems. Could you elaborate more about this?
Yes, it's one of the important things about medical education. I remember when I started the master's program, I thought that there will only be physicians, clinical doctors, pediatricians like me. There are a lot of pediatricians, by the way, in medical education. But then when I entered the program and they explained that it was a master's in health professions education, not just medicine. At the beginning, I was uncomfortable because we are so used in medicine to be like this, the leaders, the top of the pack, etc., the chiefs, the directors. And then we leave all these hierarchies during our training. And we developed this identity first as a medical student, then as a resident, then as a specialist. And our individual identities mark us for life. I mean, where we have this imprinted, tacit and explicit knowledge that we learned during the residency, and we have our own paradigms. So if you have one paradigm, the positivistic paradigm or the traditional paradigm, then if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I mean, you are so used to approach problems the same way. So the master's program and the Harvard Macy program was eye-opening for me, because I was face-to-face with psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, not just clinicians, nurses. I was surprised to know that the nursing profession globally is much more advanced than the medical profession in qualitative research and mixed method research. They publish a lot. And we tend in our countries, at least in Mexico, to discriminate nurses as if they were lower in the professional chain of command, or the food chain, as we say in medicine. So that was eye-opening for me. And during the program, when I had the fortune of having George Bordache from Chicago as my teacher, that was the first time that I heard the concept of conceptual frameworks. So when I started studying all the big names of education, and then you become fluent in Piaget, John Dewey, Vygotsky, etc., and you feel that you know a lot. And then when you start, at the beginning, qualitative research for me was completely foreign. I mean, I said, what is this? This is not science. But then I remember in one of our first conference on qualitative research that the teacher said, it's like if you are a quantitative person, you arrive at a party and there is the food in the table with meat and bread and fruit, etc. And the quantitative person, what he or she does is look at the colors, weigh the things, estimate how many calories each portion of food has. But the qualitative research is actually tastes the food. And, so that was, I remember that message, because we physicians believe that people are robots, and because we have the wisdom of medicine. If I tell you that your infection is viral and you do not need antibiotics, I sleep at night peacefully. But the patient wants some kind of medication or drugs, and the qualitative studies explain why patients require antibiotics for viral infections, and explains why physicians actually provide antibiotics for viral infections despite the sciences. So, I mean, all these tensions, as you develop this identity as educator, you let go a little bit of this mental rigidity of medical clinical research or traditional research. So maybe that's a little bit of that. And I mean, you develop the identity of clinician, and then in parallel, you develop an identity of educator. And the problem with develop this identity of educator at the beginning, without any training, without any faculty development, you become used to teaching as you were taught, and you evaluate as you were evaluated, and you perpetuate all these traditions that are not evidence-based. And you continue to do things. So it's critically important to actually have a more flexible identity as you grow as an educator.
So may I add a question, like in the same direction?
Yes.
So for you, like, to explain to the people that are watching, like, if they want to change, like, from a social studies or medical education, where they can learn, like, you have the master, but sometimes the master, like, is on person, maybe they are expensive. You have any suggestion, like, where and how can we learn, can we improve, like, our tools to do, like, medical education or health professional medical education research?
Well, I think that, as you know, universities, we are in a crisis right now. Degrees, societies does not appreciate a lot of degrees, and our political leaders do not listen to the advice of scientists or people with a lot of letters after their name. I think that we have to realize that most physicians, most clinicians do not have the time or the incentives in their system and punishment and reward system in their hospitals or the universities to dedicate a lot of time or a lot of money to learn education. I mean, not everybody is as pathological as probably Valdez or myself, that we love medical education or education. So I would recommend there's a lot of micro-credentials out there all over the world. And many of them are cheap or low price, and there are a lot of MOOCs, there are a lot of online courses. And one of the great experiences on the pandemic that I am sure you shared too, is that medical educators all over the world are very nice people. I mean, we are not these crazy sociopathic, pathological persons that we sometimes see in some of our specialty colleagues. And they usually like to share, no? So I would suggest that we keep promoting medical education. I mean, if you teach, you have a moral and ethical obligation to actually know what you are doing. Otherwise, it's like practicing medicine without a license. So I realize that we cannot ask people to have masters, but there are diplomates, small courses, MOOCs, and there's a huge amount of material in YouTube that's there for the taking. For example, you want to learn right now generative artificial intelligence, you can learn that for free with courses from MIT, from Harvard, from a lot of places. And with the artificial intelligence tools, the language barrier actually disappears. My children are right now in an education exchange in Germany, and my wife, who doesn't speak German, actually communicates with the mother of the children in Germany, where my children are staying, actually with ChatGPT and translating everything on the fly. I mean, we have a huge opportunity to take advantage of all these materials.
Oh, thank you.
Excellent.
So yes, and I don't know where we are on time.
We still have 15 minutes. We are okay. I don't know if you want to share something from the PowerPoint, or we can keep
Yes,
going.
let's finish that so we can
Okay.
get the final.
Also, can you share the presentation again, please? Just put here. Okay. Lessons.
So one of the things that, as you learn in life, I will be 65 this year, next October. You learn to be tolerant of failure. You need to be tolerant of imperfection. I mean, this is what we have. We have to do it. So the only constant in life is change, and it's not linear. Like in medicine, in physiology, when we learn basic sciences, we think that everything is very linear, very cause effect, and actually the concept of complexity sciences and complex adaptive systems is very relevant to everything that we do in education, like trying to change a curriculum, for example. Next. And then we have all these tensions, these simultaneous influencing forces, the environment, for example, the government, the people that we work with, the work environment, and our personal issues, our family, to achieve all this balance and be happy, because we do not have unhappy physicians. Nobody wants to have an unhappy physician as your personal doctor. And we have a lot of opportunities, and there are a lot of decisions that many of them are not planned. They just arrive in front of you and you have to take them. Next. And in countries like ours, we have a lot of lack of long-term planning. Mexico is a perfect example for that. And it's difficult to choose your life track forever. And as the younger generations are being forced to acknowledge, you have to change places, lines of works, etc. It's not easy. You cannot plan your life perfectly as if it was a linear thing. Next. And you arrive a lot of crossing the Rubicon points. I mean, when I decided to dedicate my life to medical education, I had to choose between a busy clinical practice, which was completely crazy in Mexico City with the traffic, etc., and to do more in education. So I took the decision, and I've been happy with it. Next. And there's a lot of serendipity. There's a lot of luck, but also hard work. And it's this thing of being at the right place at the right time. Next. And mentorship, I cannot emphasize enough the need to choose appropriate mentors. My mentor was a pediatrician, a pediatric intensivist. He also did a master's in education, and he was convinced that the only way to really change things is what to dedicate to education. So I have to thank him a lot for his mentorship. That I am here because of him. And also education is this labor of love. I know it sounds a little bit cheesy, but we do it because we love it. And we practice medicine because we love medicine. If you are unhappy as a doctor or as a teacher, that's not a good thing. And the inspiring thing is a two-way street. You have to, on one hand, to inspire students, but on the other hand, you have to be inspired by students. I have a lot of students that have inspired me to continue on this educational track. Next. And a few more lessons. Procrastination is everywhere, in developing country or not. It's everyone. We have to juggle with the deadlines. I have several deadlines for this week and this month and this year. Next. And then this is one of the recommendations that I found very useful, to take this varicella approach to research. I mean, you have, as in varicella, different lesions in different stages, equal in research. The same in research, you have research questions, ideas, we have studies that are ongoing, we have drafts of papers, and we have papers that are in the peer review processes. So this varicella approach allows you to be to actually advance, otherwise you will be paralyzed. Next. And try to be an agent of change. It's not easy, and to be an agent of change, you have to actually be able to change yourself. Next. And I remember in the Harvard Macy program, the motto, the message was, question your assumptions always. That involves reflective practice and critical thinking. And that's critically important for students, for teachers, and for us. But on the other hand, if you overthink things too much, and then you fall into paralysis by analysis, and then you actually do nothing. Next. And we have to try to make a difference in achievable outcomes. It's sad that in education we have all these shallow or superficial outcomes, like attendance, for example. And I listen to my colleagues. We had a very successful conference because we had 1,000 attendees and we had a lot of money of that. And we do not worry if they learn or not. So it's not easy, but we have to try to make a difference in our settings. Next. And I mean, I know that I have been said a lot of things about myself. I know I'm a relatively humble person. It's actually uncomfortable for me to say all these nice things about me. But we have to avoid this, what's called the hurry syndrome. And education actually makes you humble because you recognize that an anthropologist, a sociologist, a qualitative researcher knows much more about educational research than you do, and you have to work hand in hand. Next. And I want to finish with this. Nobody has ever won a Nobel Peace Prize or a Nobel Prize for education. And I mean, the satisfaction and the rewards are in the task itself. Next. And it's the last. I want to point this out because for many people what we do in medical education is not actually research. I am tired of listening to people to say, that's not research, that's just a descriptive study, or that's just an anecdote, or that's just a case report, or that's just, and it's not experimental. So we have to keep fighting these misconceptions of medical education with our health profession colleagues. Next. And I mentioned this already, the scholarship. We have to balance our scholarship not just in research, but also in integration and application, and of course, teaching. Next. And this brings to mind, I know that some of you have been or are FAMER fellows. I remember Paige Morahan and John Orchini several years ago pointing out that in developing countries, in settings where we have limited resources, we need to combine things. And I love this model of the double helix of activity and scholarship, because we have to do a lot of things, we provide a lot of service, and we have to combine the service with the creation of creation of scholarships. Next. And this is the last one. Generally speaking, people concerned with medical education are friendly and helpful. So, well, those are the slides, and let's return to the last minute of the discussion.
Any question? Other question, Marcos, Maria? I have one more, Melchor.
Yes.
I would like to share with us the importance of creating within the university, in your place, a team. I knew some of your team members at MIT last year. I was delighted. Love that guys. And I see that you're building all these years a team to give this the energy to move forward your task, the task that university expect that you and your team do. Can you just talk about this? How important to have a group of people, the community of practice, the teams that work together with some common interest in education?
Okay, that's a critical important point that I didn't mention in the slides, but I mean, you have to work with other people. I mean, in ancient history, the single individual was a master clinician, a master researcher, and a master teacher. That's, I mean, there's no way that a single person can know everything. So when I did the master's program, I developed this love for all the other professions. And when I returned to the Faculty of Medicine, I convinced the dean that we needed to have in the medical education area, not just physicians and nurses. We needed to have sociologists, we needed to have psychologists, we needed to have anthropologists, and we needed to start talking to them at the same level, because it's very easy as physicians with the hierarchies in the hospital to look down on everybody. I mean, you are not a physician? Okay. You are a PhD? Well, that's not a real doctor. That's like Isaac Asimov, the science fiction author, said his mother told him, well, you may be a doctor of science, but you are not a real doctor. Real doctors are clinicians. So we clinicians have these huge egos that do not, I mean, it's very difficult, and that's part of our hidden curriculum. But returning to my medical school, when I convinced the dean to have all this interdisciplinary team, I recognized that we achieved so much by working with people that feel that you treat them respectfully, the same, and that you actually use their comments and their knowledge and their input, and that they are part of the team. So that part of developing teamworks and communities of practices is critically important, because you have to involve people that not just supplement you, but actually complement you, that make you give more than you already are. So doing the last mile and doing the extra effort with several dedicated persons is something that, I mean, it's critically important for success. But also recognize that that's not easy, because the poor university, the salaries are not very high, and people tend to focus on their field. If you are a sociologist, you want to be in a sociological school or a social sciences faculty. But we have managed to accumulate a team of people that are from all fields of knowledge. We even have a philosopher. Philosophy is critically important for medicine. I don't know. We need to be involved more with these kinds of professions that are usually not in the hospitals. Well, that's about it, Valdez.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, just one. Like, when my kids, like I have two kids. One is in the middle, and the other one's the elementary school. And the teacher from them, like they take several courses to be a teacher. But in the health profession, like sometimes you are a physician or other profession, and then we become a teacher without sometimes like a formal training. So I think we need much more of faculty development. So I'd like to ask about your experience of the residents training. I think you mentioned like in the beginning that you have kind of a program that you teach how the residents can help, like can act as a teacher. How is this program? Like, did it work?
Well, actually, in '94, the Dean of Faculty of Medicine actually changed the curriculum, and he recognized that in the residency programs, it's very difficult to have these separate courses. I mean, residency is chaotic, as I am sure it's a little bit in Brazil too. So the curriculum is, it has a clinical practice track, which is the main part. I mean, where you learn to be a pediatrician, surgeon, etc., internal medicine. But then it has a seminar of your specialty, where you learn the theoretical concepts of your specialty. And here the two seminars, a research seminar that goes, it's a curriculum track throughout the whole residency, where you learn the concepts of evidence-based medicine, clinical research. And we have an education seminar, which many people do not recognize it as very important, but it's in the curriculum. It's formal. It requires a grade. You have to actually grade the residents on education during the residency. And it requires a few hours per month, but it requires you to, I mean, all residents and all teachers to actually have a small amount of educational theory and practice. That's on the formal paper curriculum. In real life, the lived curriculum, this education seminar, there are some hospitals that it's basically non-existent, but there are some hospitals that take it very seriously. And we did also an online course, because, you know, with teachers, you have all these, yes, I want you to train me, but then, well, you have to be on this place, this day, at this hour. I cannot do it because I have to save a lot of lives. I have surgery and I have to be in the ER, etc., etc. I want it online. And then you do it online, and they do not get online because they are very busy. So you have to actually try to convince the leaders of the institution to build into the recognition, in the incentives, in the reward system of the institution, to have these things to be mandatory, at least a small course before being hired or contracted as a teacher. And it's not easy, because they say the only requirement is to have the disciplinary expertise. You have to teach surgery, you have to be a surgeon. But you have to be a surgical teacher, you have to know a little bit about surgical education. So we keep struggling with that a lot. It's not, I mean, it's a never-ending struggle, as I am sure it is in your institution.
Perfect. Well, we are in the last minute. I want to ask if Ana Maria and Marcos have any other things to comment.
Oh, just say thank you. Muchas gracias.
Oh, you're welcome.
I also would like to say thank you for your presentation. Once more, I'm impressed with your production, and I also will check your massive open courses on Coursera. I think will be very nice to see you teaching about medical education. So thank you very much for all your talk today.
You're welcome, Ana Maria.
I also want to thank you. It's always inspiring. I had the great pleasure to meet Melchor some years ago, and we have been keeping in contact in our WhatsApp group. We work together in the NBME, some committees, and I'm really glad to receive you here online in University of São Paulo, sharing your expertise. Thank you to you very much. And I want to thank you, Lucia, for all the support. Everything here is working due to Lucia. And I pass the word to you just for your final words. Thank you, Melchor again.
Thank you, Valdez. I was thinking that we didn't talk about money or finances, but that's a theme for another conference. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I hope this is useful.
You send money, he is freeze. No.
We don't have this problem here, right?
Yes, I know.
Okay, just kidding. So thank you, and so I think now we can finish. Okay, so thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Para quem está assistindo a transmissão agora, depois que ela acabou, não se esqueçam, todos os meses a gente tem uma live, e esse ano o tema é sobre educação nas profissões de saúde. Então assinem o canal para acompanhar o conteúdo e continuar, então, sendo inspirada por profissionais que estão fazendo pesquisa para entender melhor as suas práticas de educação. Muito obrigada a todo mundo que assistiu até aqui. Professor Valdes, que caiu, né? E professor Melchor, de novo, muito obrigada. Bye, bye.
Thank you very much. Obrigado. Gracias. Bye, bye.